Everybody. Thanks for joining our second installment of Cyber Conversations. I'm really excited to have this conversation today. A little bit of background. My name is Vin Curran. I'm the head of revenue for Acrisure Cyber Services. And today I have the tremendous honor of asking Adam Abrish a lot of pertinent questions about the cyber market. Just a really quick primer about Acrisure and then Acrisure Cyber Services. So Acrisure is a global fintech leader. We provide a variety of solutions around insurance, reinsurance, payroll, employee benefits, real estate services, and then last but not least, technology and cybersecurity solutions to millions of businesses and individuals around the world. Drilling down a bit further, and the folks on this call, Acrisure Cyber Services, or ACS, as we're commonly referred to, is the technology and cybersecurity services practice within Acrisure. We provide one of the broadest and clearest converged models of insurance, cybersecurity controls and advisory, and tech services. So today I have the great honor of like I said, asking Adam Abrish a lot of pertinent questions. A little bit about Adam. Adam is the National Cyber Risk Practice Leader at Acrisure. So in that role, he leads cyber liability education for Acrisure brokers and clients across the country. He also guest lectures at Fordham and Hofstra. He's a frequent speaker at Net Diligence, the Professional Liability Underwriting Society's Plus Cyber Conference, and the New York City and New Jersey Bar Association. Adam holds the Certified Insurance Counselor, CIC, Chartered Liability Coverage Specialist, CLCS, and the Cyber COP Insurance Certification from Carnegie Mellon and Chubb designations. And he was honored with Net Diligence's Toby Merrill Rising Star Award in 2019. Adam has also been named, very recently, a finalist for the Cyber Risk Industry Person of the Year at the 2026 Xywave Cyber Risk Awards. So make sure after this that you vote for Adam. Just quick primer. Why we feel like this conversation matters now is all about the convergence of cybersecurity, AI, and cyber liability insurance. Cyber insurance is increasingly becoming a reflection of cybersecurity maturity. And we know that AI is accelerating both attacker capability and underwriting scrutiny. Organizations that build out and continue to build out operational resilience will have a long-term advantage in both security and insurability. The themes that we're going to hit on for today's discussion are the cyber insurance market, coverage gaps and claims, cybersecurity controls, AI and emerging threats, and the evolving role of brokers and advisors. You got to forgive my dog in the background. And then obviously we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, Adam, I don't know if I missed anything that you want to add, but now's your chance.
Oh, thanks a lot, Vin. I appreciate the intro. It's great to be here today. I saw a lot of the names and the attendees, recognize some of them, don't recognize a few other ones, but excited to be here today. It's a world in which Vin and I operate every single day. And so to be able to kind of, bring you some of the insights and what we're seeing in the marketplace, what we've seen over the course of this year, what we're looking at kind of going into next year is kind of the big piece of this. But we want to make sure also that if you have questions that you're not hearing being addressed here, please submit those to us. You can do that via the chat and also make a comment. And if we don't get to that question during today's session, we'll make sure to follow up and hopefully answer those questions after today's session.
Awesome. All right. So just to open, Adam, if you had to summarize the cyber insurance market in one or two sentences, maybe 3 to 5 today, what would it be?
Yeah. So I think the best way to put it right now, I would say that the cyber insurance marketplace is recalibrating. Several years ago, 5, 6 years ago, we were going through a hard market, and then prices kind of leveled off, came down a bit. Underwriting softened a little bit. And I think what's happening right now is we're seeing some of the claims mature over the last couple of years. And now those are starting to really kind of show their teeth. And so we're seeing some increased underwriting discipline coming into the place right now. So I think, recalibrating is the best way to look at it. And there's obviously a number of factors that go into that. But I think that's the word that I would use to describe it.
Recalibrating. Okay. All right. So since it is recalibrating, I guess my follow question to that would be, what has changed in the last 12 to 24 months? Has it been largely the threat landscape? Has it been underwriting behavior? Has it been something else, or a combination of all those?
Yeah. So I think there's, it's never, I never think it's just one thing that's, influencing the market. Obviously, the cyber insurance marketplace takes into account, organizations all over the world, all different types of organizations, sizes, industries, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, when I look at what's changed and what's kind of continuing to evolve, I think, as I mentioned, some of the claims from a few years ago are fully materializing, whether that's business interruption claims. We're getting a better sense of what that looks like. some of the third party liability claims that are maturing. So, folks alleging damages out of or arising out of some type of cyber incident, those claims are maturing. You've also seen, I don't think it's any secret to the folks on this call, hopefully, that, there's been an uptick in terms of AI being used in cyber. I would say cyber attacks or gathering cyber intel. So I think that's a rapidly evolving field and kind of threat vector or threat accelerant, I should say, is probably the best way to say it. And I think those things taken together have resulted in a shift in underwriting attitude. Right. So there's some folks taking a look at this. They're understanding their book of business a little bit better, seeing where these losses really come in, where they mature, what they actually look like and end up being paid out. As I look at the market today, and the reason I use the word recalibrating is I think all of those factors right now are kind of coming back together and informing what the next 6 months and next 18 months are going to look like for us.
Awesome. Awesome. I guess my next question would be, and I've heard this thrown around a handful of times, and I don't know if it's actually true. Are we in a soft market today?
So good question. I think we have been over, the past couple of years. What I will say right now is we're starting to see the market firm up a bit. So, we're seeing a little bit of pricing elevation come through on some of the renewals. We're also seeing underwriters take a little bit of a deeper dive. The questions they're asking, some follow-up questions, supplementals that were being seen added, also the use of scanning technology and making sure that, if these scans are picking up certain exposures or vulnerabilities, carriers are really clamping down on that because different carriers have different viewpoints on this. But these scanning technologies can be very useful, right? Sometimes they pick up some false indicators, I'll say, but a lot of these carriers have put a lot of work into this technology and focusing in on that in combination with the questions that they're asking.
So the scanning technology, just a little background on that. What,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think, the best way to think about this is, when you apply for insurance, you can have a static application that's, what's the name, address, revenue. What are your controls? Do you have MFA in place? Do you have MDR? Do you have vulnerability management? What are you doing for backups? Those sort of questions. I would say in conjunction with those applications, these carriers are also now using scanning technology, not dissimilar from what the bad guys use to look for vulnerable types of technology or vulnerable configurations of technology. So the carriers are running those scans against the domains of the applicants and then coming back if they see something gets flagged where they've, let's say they've seen a number of losses across a certain portfolio and, they've tied it back to this specific technology being misconfigured or just a lot of vulnerabilities in a specific type of technology, they'll flag that as part of their underwriting and say, hey, you need to reconfigure this and prove that you fixed this in order for us to carry through with these terms. Otherwise, we may not write it.
I'm gonna ask a few questions on some of that a little later on. The last thing before we move into coverage gaps and claims, are what are some of the biggest trends that customers, clients, insured, right, should be paying attention to right now? And then what are some of the maybe blind spots that they're not thinking about, but they matter? They matter to carriers and just their cyber program in general, holistically.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things, right? So MFA, multi-factor authentication, was the one that became a really big focus several years ago. And identity, kind of making sure that you had multi-factor authentication in place across your environment, using it for emails, using it for privileged access, et cetera, et cetera. And that is important, and carriers are still asking about that. One of the big shifts that I've seen recently is, some carriers, I would say one of the big ones is managed EDR or MDR solutions. So having those technologies in place is great. But what carriers really like to see is that somebody is behind the scenes managing those technologies on a client's behalf. That's what really makes a difference, right? I attribute that to almost like having a house alarm. And if you're getting all these alerts and nobody's doing anything about it, that's not great.
Yeah.
If you're getting alerts and you're able to act upon it, that goes a long way. I think just in general for cyber risk, but that's also something that, understandably underwriters care about a lot.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, what good is a tool if no one's sitting behind it? And particularly when your systems need to run 24/7, so they need to be protected 24/7. And
Yep.
that requires investment in human capital or, cybersecurity partners. That's awesome. Appreciate that. Jumping into coverage gaps, claims, operational exposure. I know you've filled me in a lot on what happened in 2020 around the rise of business email compromise and really cybercrime getting down market to the SMB space. To that end, what exclusions or sublimits should buyers be most focused on right now? And then the fast follow question, or I guess I'll hold. I'll ask the fast follow as soon as you answer.
Yeah. So I think it's important by and large, what you try to do when you're structuring a policy is you try to make sure that there aren't any supplements, right? And I think we've done a good job. I would say, most of if you're with a good broker that's focused on the space and doing a good job, you shouldn't have too many supplements on the policy. Some of the ones that you see may be for kind of ancillary benefits to a coverage that aren't core. But one of the main supplements that you'll see on almost every cyber policy is something that you mentioned, and is a sublimit for social engineering and cyber crime on the policy. So if you have $1 million policy, it's not out of the ordinary. I would say it is common practice to have a sublimit on the cyber crime of, potentially 100,000, 250,000. In some cases, you can get up to 500,000. And I think that's important because that's fine as long as the insurance buyer, or that organization understands that that's there, because you can get higher limits for crime. So you can purchase a standalone crime policy. You can apply for higher social engineering and cybercrime coverages. And so I think it's an important discussion to have. And we end up having that discussion a lot with folks because they say, well, everything else is a million. Why is this sublimited? That stems from kind of when the policies were originally being built. Crime losses are a theft of funds or securities, right? That's typically how that's framed. And what happened when we were building cyber policies, that was a coverage that kind of got included because there was some overlap between cyber policies and crime policies. So a lot of the cyber carriers added on cyber crime. But if you want to get higher limits, oftentimes the best way to do that is to purchase a standalone crime policy with those elevated limits.
Could the insured posture themselves or put enough tooling in or something, some combination of maybe it's premium or something to bolster and remove the sublimit when it comes to cybercrime or funds transfer, or the business email compromise type coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's an example of where it's not just software. Like, so you want to make sure you have email security in place. That's important. But a lot of the questions that carriers are asking about, apart from just the technical side of it, are what are the policies and procedures surrounding the transfer of funds, right? And so I talked about multi-factor authentication before. I'm going to switch gears. It sounds similar, but it's different. Dual authentication, right? So if somebody's changing banking information in an email, you need to confirm that via a different means of communication, right? So pick up the phone and call somebody, right? Or if somebody calls you to tell you that the banking information has changed, make sure you send them an email, send them a text, figure out a different way to confirm that information. So questions like that, is there a limit up to which, let's say if you're transferring over $50,000, do you have multiple sign-offs on that? Right. So there's certain things on the policy side that go a long way in conjunction with the technology side on those losses. And that is what underwriters are looking for. Once again, when you look at this, the underwriters are trying to limit their exposure to loss. So as you look at that as an organization, that's good practice to do whether or not you're buying insurance. But those are the controls that underwriters are looking for in order to give you those higher limits.
So a mix of tools, process, right? Like you said, dual authentication. Hey, I picked up the phone and I called the number that we have recorded in our system of record, not the number in the person's requesting an ACH. What's the state of ransomware today? Obviously, it seems like business email compromise is, not to put it lightly, but the belle of the ball in terms of cyber threat actors. But when people think of cyber events, they traditionally think of some sort of ransomware or data breach scenario. What little background on that?
Yeah. So I would say by and large, the main two causes of loss today are still ransomware and business email compromise. Ransomware attacks are everywhere. I know I was dealing with two separate ones this morning. We're seeing those kind of pour in all over the place, right? I think you've seen several high profile attacks across various industries. You had the Land Rover breach overseas in London. You had recently Canvas, which is a a software and technology platform utilized by universities and
Yep.
schools, get shut down with ransomware. So it's it's unfortunately it's equal opportunity in terms of getting hit with these type of attacks. And and one thing I like to point out, I think a lot of folks sometimes can say it's easy to understand why, like, somebody would go after a bank or JP Morgan or something like that. And I think a lot of people sit there and say, why would a hacker wake up in the morning and decide to hit ABC manufacturing, right? I'm just a manufacturer over here. I'm not bothering anybody. And these attacks, by and large, that's not how that works. It's not somebody wakes up and tries to get into your systems. And I mentioned a lot of technology that the carriers are using. The bad guys use that too. And they're looking for the easiest way in, right? The path of least resistance. And if they're able to scan using some of these tools and using some AI technologies, if you're able to scan, thousands of different businesses looking for a given exposure, and then you have a piece of malware or ransomware that's designed to fit in there and exploit that vulnerability, that's really how these events are starting. It's not starting with targeting a specific business per se.
Jumping into cyber security controls, it felt like in 2020 and onward, there was right post COVID-19, there was a little bit of a response in the market with carriers taking a harder look at controls. However, it felt like it wasn't probably as deep, depending on the risk, depending on obviously the business. It wasn't as deep as a cybersecurity engineer would want it to be, which understandably so. Are we starting to finally see an alignment between cybersecurity controls and robustness of cybersecurity controls and insurance pricing, or is there still a decent amount of disconnect? I know you hit on the some of the carriers use scanning engines and scanning tools to take a look at businesses, public facing IP and see what's open and exposed. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a false flag. How is that today in, May 19th of 2026 versus where it was 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think one of the big things here is that if you look at other lines of coverage, GL, property, things like that, we have hundreds and hundreds of years of data behind it to support, rating and underwriting and cyber, just by its very nature, in terms of the fact that it's come around a lot more recently. You didn't have that huge wealth of data and claims information. So what you're seeing now is these carriers now know, right? They know, hey, we were right in this line of business. We took some really heavy losses over here. And the carriers, I think, are doing a really good job behind the scenes, and they're usually happy to talk to you about this too. We're not just blindly asking these questions to ask them, right? We're really focusing in on this because we've paid out a lot of losses associated with this type of technology, or we've seen a lot of losses in when you have remote environments set up in a certain way, right? That's a big focus where people have really, really gotten crushed on the carrier side, and now they have the data behind those claims. And so what you're seeing a lot of the times is a carrier taking their not just their view of cyber risk and what's important, but their experience on that side, right? In real dollars and cents. Where have we paid out, right? What are the similarities between some of these things, right? What are some of the inferences that we can draw when we take a look at, there's a number of carriers that publish great cyber claims reports. I encourage you to, download them. Coalition, Chubb. You have things from Net Diligence that come out, Xywave, Swiss Re, right? Like, I mean, it's everywhere. And you try to. What I think is really important is get as much. If you're really interested in this and you want to learn about it, right? There's so much data out there from folks that are trying to explain some of this stuff to the marketplace. And I think by and large, the big change is we have more information now as a result of these claims coming in than we did 6 years ago.
You mentioned MFA. You hit on MFA a decent amount. We hit on email security. Which controls do you feel are actually moving the needle in a meaningful way? Whether it's on coverage or premium reduction, or are there ones that are complete no brainers? And yes, we need this, or is it predominantly just MFA and a
Yeah,
mix of policies?
I think so. I think there's two different sides to it. Right? I think the big one, like I mentioned before, those managed services. So managing vulnerability management and your endpoint detection and response software. big. The other side that goes along with MFA, I would look at that as like ITDR, so identity threat detection and response, because that's when we talk about MFA, that's like one of the things involved with preventing an identity from being compromised or stolen or misused. And what you'll notice in a lot of these attacks is that's where it starts. Somebody takes over somebody's account and is able to operate within an environment as a permitted user. So the system's not going to flag that person as an external threat or as somebody that's coming into the environment, but being able to pick up on that and respond to it is really, really important, because then what you're doing is you're monitoring and protecting the external perimeter, right? And you're getting alerted if something's inside of it, but all the people that operate within that broader perimeter also need to have a level of protection, and there need to be indicators of compromise, just like there are for all the other technologies for those identities as well.
That's interesting. I remember, I think you shared this stat with me. Maybe it was 2023 or 2024. Like the average dwell time that a threat actor would be in an environment was 200 something day, like 290 days or 275 days. And it decreased the following year.
Hmm.
To your point about, going after identities and operating within an environment that it's scary, but it calls out the need to your point, protect your identities and monitor those identities. You talked about data and how much data in other lines of coverage, 100 years worth of data, claims data that carriers can reflect on. Cyber being, in the grand scheme of things, so new. Are carriers underwriting cyber risk better today? I mean, one would assume that they are, or is it more selectively that they're underwriting cyber risk, right? Like, hey, if you're a 50 to a 250 person business, they're just going to say, you know what, you're kind of from a cyber risk profile, you're below that cyber poverty line, so we're gonna underwrite you accordingly.
Yeah, great question. And I think there's a couple different approaches, and it depends on who you talk to on this. Because there's some folks on there that, it depends on what your approach is as a carrier and also how much you have on the books, right? Are you in growth mode from the carrier perspective or MGA perspective? Are you somebody who's had a cyber book for 20 years? Like those are different, very, very different organizations, right? And they're going to take a different approach to cyber risk. I think broadly speaking, I would answer your question as yes. I think folks have gotten better with cyber underwriting, right? Just because there's more tools that are available, there's more data that's available, and I think that's a good thing for everybody, really, because I shouldn't say that. It's probably not a good thing for people who snuck through some of that underwriting a while ago and got inexpensive policies with full limits, and now somebody's taking a second look at it and going, no way, or yeah, we'll write this, but it's going to cost you 50, 70% more. But I think those types of outcomes also influence the decisions, because somebody's now seeing in black and white, wow, this is how important this is for us as an organization. And so hopefully that drives good change, right, across the entire ecosystem. And that's really, as somebody who's worked in this space for over a decade now, that's what we're really looking for, right? We want to reward the people that are doing the right things from a cybersecurity perspective and help the folks that maybe aren't at that level. Let's help them get there. Let's provide incentives. Let's provide rewards in the form of whether that's premium or coverage or deductibles, whatever it may be. But let's help everybody, kind of lift themselves up from a security posture perspective.
You hit on the carrier scan tools. How much do those impact underwriting? And then the other part to that question is how much is underwriting based on just application based trust? Because you hit on it like, hey, you were someone that 5 years ago you kind of snuck in to a pretty good policy because the carrier took you at your word. So how much are carriers looking at just, hey, the application looks like everything passes go, or is there a decent amount of technical validation that goes into the carrier underwriting a policy?
Yeah, so good question. Everybody's least favorite answer, right? It depends. And I think, there's showstoppers, right? Like if you submit an application or, 100 million or $300 million revenue organization and you don't have any MFA, you don't have any EDR, you don't have any email security. You're not like, I mean, those are, yeah, you're going to get nailed on. Doesn't matter what the scan. You don't have to look at a scan. right? This is not a good risk. You guys do not care. You are looking at, insurance to pay the bill in lieu of investing in cybersecurity. Folks are not that's not what they're looking to write. So I think it gets a little more nuanced as you get into the larger space or some of the spaces that have been hit particularly hard historically. So financial services, professional services, the public entity space, things like that, where folks are really honing in, and it's healthcare. I don't know if I mentioned that, but like, where we've hit these big losses. So folks really want to make sure that you're battening down the hatches on these things, right? So it's not just, yes, we have it, but is it configured properly? How are you over the course of a policy period maintaining that proper configuration? I think that's important too. And I think, how, when there is a CVE, right, a vulnerability exploit that becomes available and you know about it, how long does it take you to patch that? Right? What's your average response time there? Like those sorts of things. And in what process do you have in place to make sure you're able to action on that? Those are the things that I think are the follow up questions to the just yes, no that historically had been asked.
And just a real quick caveat, when they're going through the cyber application process, right? To your point about yes, no, can they attach more details, right? If it's a gray answer or there's ambiguity, right? Can they attach more details to the application?
Absolutely. And something that I'm a fan of, and you and I have done this on specific accounts. What I'm a fan of is, yeah, there's an application, and I think sometimes, especially when it's more complex or nuanced, or people are particularly proud of the advancements that they've made in technology and infrastructure. Don't just submit an application, right? Vin and I have done this on a number of accounts where we're telling a story, right? Where, hey, this is where we were, last year. This is what we've done over the course of the year. This is where we're planning on going over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. And what that does to an underwriter is, as I mentioned before, that underwriting takes place oftentimes as just a point in time on that expiration date. But now, when you start giving some history into that and you predict that a little bit into the future, now you're giving that underwriter something to work with, right? So if you are in a challenging class or you do work with a lot of sensitive data, hey, not only are we doing the right things for today, but we're planning to invest on the right things for tomorrow. And that's a story that underwriters can get behind, the markets can get behind. And that's something we love to do in addition to just, submitting an application.
Everyone's favorite thing to talk about right now is AI.
Yeah.
But it's definitely changing the landscape underneath our feet in real time. Obviously, a few weeks ago, Anthropic talked about Mythos and how only a select few large enterprises have access to it, but it's going to completely change the vulnerability landscape. Just last week, Microsoft threat intelligence discovered the first AI based 0 day. So it's pretty scary for your average bear. How from your seat, right? How is AI changing the landscape right now? And I'm assuming that underwriters are using it as well too when they start to model out their risk. So walk us through a little bit of that if you can pull back the curtain.
Yeah, and I think I may have used this term earlier. The way that I really, at a very high level, there's all different ways you can take AI, right? The way that I view it in general is it's an accelerant, right? If you have something that's a task that's tedious, it takes a lot of time to complete, AI can help make you accomplish that task faster, right? So that goes for almost anything. When you
Yeah.
look across cyber threats, if you're able to collect intelligence faster and able to make determinations faster, that allows you to perpetrate more attacks. So I think AI is useful in a sense in that if you give it instructions to go find XYZ, it will do that. And now you're removing the time that a bad actor may have actually had to spend doing that. And in terms of developing code, right? I think we've all seen this where AI has gotten very, very good at developing code and following instructions. And guess what? Like software, right? We use in all our every day in our daily life, malware, malicious software, that's still code, right? So if there are a lot of good guys using code to write new software programs and make things easier for us. The bad guys can use that AI to write malicious code just as quickly, right? So I think you're looking at things where it's not necessarily AI just doing it on its own, right? I think some of that stuff is a little bit overblown, but what it does do is accelerate the pace at which a threat actor can act. And also, I would say the scope of it. You can be a lot of places at once with that and interact with people in a way that you can program, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be a person interacting. It can be, an AI chatbot that you're setting up, just like we use for help desks, right? You
Yeah.
can use that for the opposite of help desks.
Yeah. 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 I saw a scary stat the other day from, it was either Coalition or CrowdStrike or one of the cyber thought leaders in the space that, in 2025, they found that AI fishes had achieved a 54% click rate versus a typical fish that a threat actor might be sitting there with their hoodie on, you can't see their face, typing up, actually had a 12% click rate. So a significantly serious increase in click rates, which is really concerning. One thing that I've started to hear a lot from some of our customers, prospects alike, has been, protecting specifically for AI. So I guess, are there coverages today that just call out AI that says, hey, what, and this is your domain, not mine, that would address AI specifically or AI risks? Are carriers prepared to underwrite it? Or are they still, to their nature, reactive and a bit and catching up?
Yes, it's a great question. It's a question I get a lot. Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I'll answer that. And thank you. What I'll say is that right now, barring exclusions, if you think about it from this perspective, whether your system was suffered a breach due to a human breaching your system or a human using AI to breach your system, it's not like policies are written to exclude those losses where somebody used AI to do something. Right. So I think that's a potential misconception there. And so by and large, today, I'm using today because this could change because nobody has excluded losses due to AI under cyber policies that I'm aware of. I haven't seen that anywhere. Now, there's some other things you can get into, privacy issues that's up for debate in some places. How does it impact professional liability? That's another tangent we can go down. But for the purposes of cyber insurance today, because somebody used AI in an incident doesn't mean that there's going to be an exclusion on there that pertains to that.
Okay, that's good to know. I guess just being cognizant of time. One final question about the role of brokers and advisors, and then we'll move into the questions because we have a ton, sitting in the queue waiting. So we'll get to all those.
Yeah.
What should clients expect from their broker in 2026 that they didn't expect 5 years ago? I know that, for you specifically, right, you started in cyber early on and almost in an evangelist type role, definitely within Acrisure, which is, 20,000 client advisors strong. How is the dynamic changed where customers should expect certain things from their brokers as it relates to cyber risk, and working with cyber carriers and underwriters.
Yeah. So here's the deal. I think it's something that you and I talk about a lot. It depends on the organization. Some people don't care and they're like, whatever, give me the policy. I want the cheapest thing. Right. That's an approach, right? That's a one way to do it. And then you have folks that go to the other end of the spectrum that are like, I want to talk to the underwriter about XYZ, right? And I want to understand this. Can you bring in a risk engineer, right? And it's like we see everything, right? We see a broad spectrum here. In terms of the expectations from the broker's perspective, the way that I look at it is we need to be able to assist in any way that the client is looking for, right? So if they're looking to understand the trends that are coming up next, yes, we have our take on it. And we're very fortunate in the fact that we have our own in-house cybersecurity department to rely on in addition to insurance brokerage. But, we can bring in carrier partners to discuss their view on it. And, the way that I view the role is, if all you're doing is slapping down a policy once a year and you're not, and folks are looking for more than that, you're trying to help them. Cyber isn't something that stays static. It's not something that happens once a year and stays the same. It changes constantly. So I would say, as much as the client wants to be engaged with that as the broker, it's your responsibility to make sure that they're staying up to date and educated on everything that's going on and taking advantage of all the resources that are out there.
Yeah. Uh, okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump into some of these questions. There's some really good ones. So the first, Adam, I have yours up. How is the market responding to third party exposure, like SaaS partners? Right, you hear this all the time. Hey, we use
Yeah,
Microsoft. If Microsoft has a breach, which they traditionally do every week, they
careful,
just
they're listening.
disclose it on Fridays at market close. How is the market responding to that? Any guidance coming on how to document and vet third parties?
Sure. Great question. And if you've heard me give a presentation before, I apologize. You're about to hear something that I say a lot. If you view your organization as the hub in this case, and all the vendors and third parties that you work with every single day as the spokes that plug in, those spokes help your business roll, right? That's what makes it a wheel. However, all of those spokes that plug into your hub also present threats, right? They present an opportunity for something bad to happen to your environment. So carriers are looking across what's the systemic risk look like across here? How many people are using a particular vendor? I think, in the auto industry, we saw this with CKG, and like that was a massive breach that brought down thousands of auto dealers at once because they were all relying on one technology. Change healthcare in the healthcare space, all relying, 1 in 3 claims that are processed for via Change Healthcare. So I think what carriers are looking a lot more at the systemic side of things and helping not just analyze those risks, but also helping transfer that via contract language, requiring your third party vendors to maintain cyber insurance and making sure that they have good cyber insurance in case they are breached. So you have some form of recourse if the damages impact you.
And the good news is I just found out we can cover all the questions, so we're going to get to them all. Um, the next question, are the carriers disclosing? So you talked about scanning engines that carriers are using. Adam Krob again with a great question. Are the
Yeah.
carriers disclosing the scanning behavior to applicants?
Yeah, I would say, for the most part, yes. Also, just to be very, very clear, none of the technology that they use is invasive in nature. So there's nothing, I've said some people get upset where they're like, oh, these people are hacking my network and they brought down our defense. And that's not what this is, right? This isn't people with red teams sitting behind there trying to hack into certain, systems or anything like that. It's the same type. It's using that technology and publicly available information and triangulating multiple data points in an effective way. So I would say in the vast majority of cases, the carriers are disclosing it, and a lot of them are very upfront and promote it. Like the
Yeah.
coalitions, the APAs of the world are very upfront about that stuff.
So it's essentially anything that a threat actor might see if they were just canvassing the organization from the outside with what's
Correct.
publicly facing on the internet. Okay, that's great. And the next question: how are underwriters currently evaluating manufacturing? This is a good one. Manufacturing and OT environments differently from traditional IT environments. That's from Christopher Blizzard. That's a Blizzard. That's a great one.
I like you put some pizzazz on Blizzard.
Well, you don't know. It could be French.
No, I think great question. And this is factoring in more and more as you look at manufacturing risks and things like that. Operational technology, I would say, legacy wasn't built with security in mind,
Yeah.
which makes sense. It was just built to work. It was built to operate, built to run. What you're seeing increasingly now in several different industries is that folks are now those systems are now connected to IT systems in some way, right? Or they're fully integrated, or people making investments to make sure all the systems are running on the same thing. And so, you're seeing carriers ask more questions about, what kind of technology is being used there? What does the segmentation look like between these systems? If there isn't, segmentation, how are you ensuring that the security controls are stable across IT and OT environments? So there's a lot that goes into that, especially when you get into organizations with more complex OT exposures.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember actually two examples to that point, the claims that you pulled me in on. One was an organization that had an aquarium that was an IoT based aquarium, and the threat actor that was the point of entry. They had a vulnerability on the aquarium, and then the other was like a Roomba, a internet based vacuum, and that was unpatched. So it's crazy. That's some of the point of entries that you see. Next question: how does the insurer evaluate ransomware readiness and recovery capability? What evidence is expected? What recovery time expectations are realistic?
Great question. So there's a number of questions that are asked on the application. In terms of evidence, I wouldn't say that we're at the evidence stage where somebody can actually produce that, or is asked, I would say. to produce evidence of that by and large. The RTOs, I would say that unfortunately I have to say depends again. It depends on the size of the organization, the sophistication of the organization, what downtime equals to that organization. I think it makes a big difference, if you're a lumber yard that gets hit with something, right? Doesn't mean you're going to stop chopping down trees. If you're a primarily online business or online retailer, or you're in the business of being up and every second means that your business is discontinued, that's different, right? And I'm purposely picking kind of two extremes. And I think in a lot of cases, it helps to understand when you answer that question, why is that the case, right? Or what would it take to get that to a lower, whether it's hours or, days, whatever, the case may be. So there's no evidence today necessarily being required or I should say for the most part, but I think that recovery time objective is becoming more and more important as you go
Yeah.
up market into larger organizations.
As AI continues to accelerate both cyber threats and operational use within organizations, what cybersecurity controls, governance practices, or monitoring capabilities are insurers beginning to view as essential indicators of insurability and risk maturity, particularly for professional services firms handling sensitive client data, whether that be
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. And I think, the way that I look at this, and we kind of I lightly touched on this before, right? Professional service organizations is you take lawyers, accountants, doctors, right? And you're utilizing AI in your business. That's something that I think is an emerging vulnerability, right? How are you walling off the AI that you are using? Because I think what we're seeing by and large, and hopefully you don't have a doctor that's doing this, where they're just dumping patient information into a public version of ChatGPT. Like once again, that's the extreme example. The other extreme would be not using AI. But I think what organizations are really trying to establish right now, which is where I think the question is going, is what are the guidelines for the proper way to utilize AI while maintaining uh, I would say the confidence and integrity of that data, right? And not making sure that doesn't get out there. And so I think, what's great is there's a number of different companies in addition to the major providers that will help wall off, your own corporate version of that AI tool so that you are able to take that and use it within your organization, protect it from getting outside, right? Segment that, make sure it cannot leave that organization. And I think that's really, really big. And so I think establishing the guidelines for that, the right controls and security, I would say walls around it are really, really important. So I can get deeper into that, but that's kind of my answer there.
Yeah. All right. Last two questions, just being cognizant of time. It seems that some of the controls are a bit of cybersecurity theater. Are the controls becoming more rational in their alignment to reality?
Yeah. I think, I think that there are a number of different cybersecurity providers out there. Right? I think we can all agree on that. Some folks are just like a flashy dashboard. There's lots of flashy dashboards and people love dashboards. I get it. But I think when you get into the practitioners of cybersecurity and the tooling that goes into that, there are serious folks that have put a tremendous amount of time and effort into building really, really, really good tools for protecting identities within organizations, endpoint detection, response, vulnerability management, backups, SIM tools to kind of bring in all that information into one place and make it more easily accessible. I think that by and large, a lot of those core toolings are really cool. And then, or I should say, really established. And then there's cool stuff that you can do that are add-ons. Do I think there's some fluff out there? Just like anything else, absolutely. But focusing on those core controls is a great place to start. And then evaluating some of the newer technologies to figure out what really makes sense and what doesn't.
So to your point, right, around there being some, to take the other Adam, who asked the question, the cybersecurity theater, the fluff, right? If you're a customer, if you're a client that's going through the underwriting process, how should they validate those things? Let's say that they're technically not like a JP Morgan Chase. They're a $300 million business, or maybe less, $100 million business, $50 million business. Who should they lean on if they don't have internal IT to validate? And even if they do, right, who should they lean on in those scenarios to say, hey, this is good, I need this, or no, this is a little bit of scareware.
Yeah. So I think, there's a couple different answers to that, right? Like Gartner and firms like that do a really good job of evaluating technology. Luckily there's a thriving online cybersecurity community that will be happy to tell you exactly what they think of things. Take that with a grain of salt. But I think it really goes back to, who are you using to evaluate the technology you use within your organization, right? Do you have an internal resource that you can use? Do you have an external resource that you can use, whether it's a managed service provider like an IT
Mhm.
firm, or somebody who's solely focused on security like an MSSP? Those are the folks that are in this space every single day evaluating these controls. But I've also had insureds bring that to me at underwriting saying, hey, we're looking at this new tool. Do you think that this would have any impact on our underwriting? And I'll take that to the carrier and say, hey guys, have you seen any of these things? What are, what's your take on this? Important, not important, need to have, nice to have, don't need. And those are different areas that you can take. But the point is, there's lots of people who know what they're doing in the space and don't feel like it's incumbent upon you to be an expert in that, right? Bring that to a number of different sources, and then you can make your own educated decision about it.
Awesome. Just as a reminder, ACS has all those things. So don't.
I should have thrown that in there, right? That's what we're here for, right? That's the bottom line. That's what we do every single day at Acrisure, and we help make recommendations to get folks to where they want. You start in a certain place. Where do you want to get to? How are you going to get there, right? And you need to help. You need to tie in a number of different parts of the business to make those decisions, right? It's a financial decision, it's an infrastructure decision, it's a people decision, and don't go it alone. You don't have to, right? There are resources here to help you with that.
Okay, and final one, as cyber incidents increasingly create professional liability exposure, how are insurers addressing overlap or gaps between cyber and LPL policies, especially where separate carriers, limits, or policy periods apply? That's a little bit of a tricky
Yeah.
one.
Sounds like we got a lawyer on here. What's going on, Paul? Like the question. I think as you look at these sort of things, the overlap, and this is kind of alluding to before, can kind of take the form of specifically, with LPL or lawyers' professional liability, which call that, lawyers' malpractice, right? Your failure to perform your legal duty and somebody's coming against you. What actually led to that, right? Did you fail in your duty as an attorney? It was your responsibility as an attorney to protect the confidentiality, and integrity, and availability of data, right? Did you misuse data? Was data, put out into the open when it shouldn't have been, and that led to an adverse outcome? I think a lot of those questions are evolving in real time today, right? And I think, the answer to the question is, that these are happening now, right? These are all happening now in the new ways that we're using data, right? And I got into this discussion before with somebody on the professional liability side. It wasn't specific to lawyers, but they were talking about the use of AI. And whether you're an attorney who, makes a mistake or fails to perform as being an attorney without using AI, or you're an attorney who uses AI and makes a mistake, and it's because of AI, that doesn't necessarily matter to that person who is harmed. And today, most of the professional liability policies are not excluding losses specifically due to the use of AI that we've seen so far. Now, once again, that could change, right? As we know, all that takes is one big case, and that could change. And you could have that exposure be put into place, and then we need to address that and address that gap. But cyber policies, by and large, are to pay for the cost of responding to some type of incident, something happening. And on the first party side, that's the incident response and the ransomware side of it. On the third party side, that's a claim alleging damages due to some type of cyber incident or some type of privacy violation.
Awesome. We do have a bunch of questions that we're not going to be able to get to.
I love
So,
the questions. There's a ton of questions today. That's awesome.
particularly the question about the dog. That yes, Kelly. So what we're going to do from here? Thanks everyone for attending. Yeah, don't forget to vote for Adam for Zywood for Person of the Year. Thanks to everyone for attending. Thank you to Adam for lending your time to answer these really important questions around cyber and the market and all these these things. Obviously, it's changing all the time. We're going to follow up with the recording to everyone, as well as the questions that we didn't get to, and then a cyber risk checklist as well too. So again, thank you so much. Be on the lookout. We're going to have another one of these in June around another topic that's really pertinent to the market today. So thanks again. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate you all. Have a good day.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Have a great day, everybody.